Hello, everybody. This week we were talking about Karl Marx, which is chapter 13. And we saw some criticisms of democracy back with Plato, which is our political system here in America. But now we're going to see some criticisms of capitalism, which is our economic system. And capitalism, if you haven't had economics or government or poli-sci in a while, basically is just a system where you are free to make as much money as you possibly can, and you are free to make absolutely no money at all. And the government really doesn't interfere with wealth accumulation. And so it's up to each individual citizen whether they succeed by leaps and bounds or whether they fail miserably and are reduced to poverty circumstances. And this really hit home for Marx, who was German and who was very, very poor and struggled financially throughout his entire life, which represents an important shift here because most of the philosophers that we've looked at have been very wealthy because you have to be wealthy to have a private tutor and access to good education, particularly back then. And certainly, you don't really have a lot of time to sit and read and write and think about philosophy all day if you have to work to support your family. So we've been looking at people who are very privileged in a lot of ways, and Marx was not. And because of that, it's going to shine through and reflect his philosophical ideas. Now, Karl Marx is the father of communism, which has a terrible reputation here in America, and what Marx was talking about was really more in tune with what we would now describe as socialism, and his viewpoint got skewed in a lot of ways to the point where when he was still alive, he actually said, I'm not a Marxist, even though he was Karl Marx. And your book spends a lot of time on his criticisms of capitalism, which I think are very important, and you could certainly still think capitalism is the best system in the world, but still see the faults in it and the flaws with it. But it's important to point out here that your book kind of totally ignores what Marx suggested to replace it. And if you are interested in it, I highly recommend that you read The Communist Manifesto, which is a book that Marx wrote with Frederick Engels, who your book talks about a little bit, who was Marx's writing partner, even though Marx gets most of the credit for everything. And a lot of people that read political philosophy actually prefer Engels' work over Marx's. But The Communist Manifesto, I'm sure you can find it at the library or bookstores or whatever. If you are interested, I highly recommend it. It's a pretty accessible book. They wrote it for the masses. They didn't write it for scholars because they were talking to the working class. So Marx saw capitalism as absolutely necessary, but he thought that it had run its course and we needed to evolve to a better system. He saw it as a stepping stone in the same way that a feudal system was a stepping stone, an oligarchy was a stepping stone, a monarch was a stepping stone to bigger and better economic systems. And it is worth pointing out that if you think that capitalism is going to be the end-all be-all of political systems, there's hopefully going to be a whole lot more human history that comes in the future, and there's no reason to suspect that capitalism would be the only system that is going to exist in the future. So on page 377, we have the distinction between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Now, these words maybe sound familiar, bourgeoisie, bourgeois for short. They're spelled really bizarrely because they're not English words, so I gave you the page number to find them. So the bourgeoisie, these are the people who are in power, the people that own the means of production. So these are the high-level managers, the business owners, the CEOs, all those sorts of people, the people who are sort of in charge and oversee everything going on in the manufacture, distribution, sales, everything of products and services. By contrast, you have the proletariat, who is everybody else, all the workers, the people that actually drive the trucks, assemble the parts, prepare them for shipping, sell them directly to the consumer, stock the shelves, actually do the work for, if it's a service, like getting your taxes done or your nails done or something like that. And so the majority of people, probably including all of us, are in the proletariat category. And the proletariat people are the people who do the most for the products and services that we end up purchasing, but they're the people that don't own anything and don't really have control over what's going on. And this is all part of what Marx calls the substructure of society. The substructure of society has three components: the means of production, These are all the natural resources that we use in order to manufacture a product. So that's the wood and the oil and all that kinds of stuff that we use in order to manufacture a product from those basic environmental things that we find. And then there's the forces of production. This is everything that it takes to transfer the means of production into a sellable product. So this, if we're talking about a physical object, that includes sawmills and chainsaws and factory equipment and all that kind of stuff. If we're talking about services, this would be the knowledge and the skill and the system and software and whatever it would take to develop something that's maybe not a physical product, but is more of a service. And then thirdly, we have the relationships of productions. And this is basically the bourgeois versus the proletariat. It's who's responsible for who takes orders from whom, who oversees what, and all the relationships that come between those. Now, it's no secret that there are a lot of products and a lot of companies that have a ridiculously high margin of profit. So that expensive pair of shoes or jeans that you pay $100 for, in actuality, probably costs less than $10 to make and manufacture, particularly since a lot of our products are made overseas in sweatshops where the workers are paid almost nothing, and they can order in bulk and ship them for very cheap and then stock them in the stores at a super inflated price. So you think for a $100 pair of jeans or shoes that they cost $10 to make. That's a $90 profit margin on every single pair of jeans that they happen to sell. Sometimes a lot more, right? $100 is cheap for a lot of shoes. So what we call that extra money, that huge profit, is surplus value. And so when you sell a lot of products that were manufactured and distributed for very cheaply, you have a lot of money left over. And that profit does not go to the people that make the product, to the people that ship the product, to the people that stock the product, or to the people that sell the product. Instead, it goes to the bourgeois, the people that own the company. So the people who contribute the least end up benefiting the most. Now, this is not to say that it's really easy to be a business owner or a CEO or anything like that. But if you're talking about all that goes into actually taking that product from A to Z, from the means of production all the way up through actually having somebody buy it, the people at the head of the company are not really directly involved at any stage here, right? They're big picture people. So the people that are actually directly responsible for you getting these products and services are not the ones that are benefiting from their sale whatsoever. And Marx saw this as a huge injustice. He saw the government as reinforcing this economic disparity because he says that the government is not for the average person. The government is working in the interests of the important people, of the bourgeois, of the wealthy class, of the people who are in power and in control. That all the decisions and policies and institutions and taxes and all that kind of stuff is really just benefiting the people who are already in power. It's not benefiting the working class, which is the majority of people. You maybe see something familiar in here if you followed the whole, the other one or the other 99% or 98% or whatever, and the whole Wall Street protests and those sorts of things, right? People are realizing there's a whole lot of us and a very small amount of them, and yet they're the ones that seem to benefit from every decision and policy that gets put in place. And this is why every politician tries to appeal to the average person to make it seem like that's who they're really going to benefit, which is obviously great for elections, and how much that actually gets paid out once the person is elected is certainly debatable. Marx is also going to say that a capitalistic society needs essentially world domination. It creates the world in its own image. And it's not going to be satisfied unless everybody else in the world is also capitalistic. And so it goes around and it forces other countries who maybe have a different political system or economic system to become capitalistic, because it assumes that that's the best way to be and it wants everybody to operate at its level. And we certainly see Marx being correct about this prediction in the spearheaded project to try to instill democracy and capitalism in other societies. And I'm going to talk about the communistic sort of societies and that whole thing later on. So if you're wondering about it, stay tuned. So what happens when you have the few people up at the top that are gaining everything and everybody else kind of getting screwed over? What you basically have is the proletariat, which, again, the majority of people, the working class, the proletariat basically have to sell themselves as a commodity, and they're treated as a commodity. So in the same way that if you own a, I don't know, department store and there are certain products that aren't selling and nobody is buying, you stop carrying those products because it's not worth paying for the manufacture, the distribution, the shipping, all that kind of stuff if nobody's going to buy it, right? So you get rid of it. Smart business decision. Well, in a capitalistic system, Marx is going to say, the working class, the proletariat, is treated the same way. It's a commodity. As soon as you are no longer worth the financial investment, you're gone. And this could be because they found somebody who would do the job for a lot cheaper than you overseas. This could be because they have found a way to replace you with a machine, right? We're seeing that a lot with, more ATMs and iPasses instead of tolls and self-checkout lines at the grocery store and more vending machines for certain things. We're replacing people with machinery. And obviously in factories, a lot of that work is done by machines now where it used to be done by actual laborers. So people are treated as a commodity, as a product, as something that you keep around as long as it's financially feasible. And because workers are turned into this sort of commodity and product by their employers, and this is an economic-wide sort of system in our country, workers have to do this too. You sell yourself. You take a terrible job that you absolutely hate. I'm sure a lot of you can probably relate to this at this time in your life. And you basically say, I'm willing to sell myself for 40 hours a week for $9 an hour or whatever it is. I think minimum wage is probably even lower than that out here. So you sell yourself, literally. Like, I'm going to take 8 hours a day, however long you work, and you're going to pay me to just completely surrender myself and do whatever you want, and I'm going to hate it the whole time. And that's terrible. And working class people didn't used to have to do that to the extent that they do now in more modern times. There's a pride that came along with work that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. So we're selling ourselves piecemeal, which is going to lead to a lot of alienation, which I'm going to talk about in the next video. But one more quick thing before we get there. Marx is going to point out that whenever you have people that focus on discrimination between different races, ethnic groups, genders, age, disability level, sexual orientation, anything like that, whenever you have specific minority groups that are being discriminated against and people focus on that, that actually benefits the bourgeoisie. It benefits the people in power, because what it does is it takes the entire proletariat and it makes them subdivide into these smaller categories. And when people feel like a victim or they feel marginalized and oppressed, it's because of a very small group that they're identifying with, whether it's other people of their same gender or race or whatever it is, religion maybe. But the reason that benefits the people in power is because it keeps the proletariat from realizing, okay, wait, there's a whole lot of us and we're all being marginalized and oppressed by a very small group up at the top. When you're part of a racial or gender or ethnic minority, you're outnumbered a lot of the time. But the working class is definitely not outnumbered. The proletariat is most people. So if people focus on being oppressed because of one of these other characteristics, it actually benefits the people in power because it keeps people from all banding together and saying, no, we're not going to take this anymore. There are way more of us than there are of you. And the bourgeois relies on the proletariat just as much, if not more, as the proletariat relies on the bourgeoisie. Because if all the workers just decide to quit or to strike, the CEO is not going to go down there and knit those jeans and ship them, drive them to the stores and stock them. That's not going to happen. And you can see the effectiveness of this when certain unionized workers actually do strike and end up a lot of times getting their demands met because you got to have somebody to do that work. And if they lose out, it's because they found somebody to do the job for cheaper than what those people wanted to do it for. So when people focus on individual or small group subculture kinds of discrimination, it actually keeps the people in power from having to wave.